Maya Chen had learned to become invisible long before she turned 16. Every morning at 6:30, she would wake up in the small apartment above the school's maintenance building, where the sound of expensive cars pulling into Westfield Academy's parking lot served as her alarm clock. Through her tiny window, she could see students stepping out of BMWs and Mercedes, their designer backpacks slung carelessly over their shoulders, completely unaware that someone was watching them from the shadows. Her mother, Linda, had been working at Westfield Academy for 12 years. She was the head caretaker, which meant she arrived before the sun came up and left long after the last teacher went home. Maya had basically grown up in these hallways, spending her childhood coloring quietly in empty classrooms while her mother vacuumed and scrubbed. Now, as a teenager, she had perfected the art of moving through the school like a ghost. The routine never changed. Maya would grab her worn backpack from the public school down the street, Roosevelt High, and walk through Westfield's back entrance. The contrast always hit her like a slap in the face. Roosevelt High had peeling paint, broken lockers, and textbooks held together with tape. Westfield Academy looked like something from a movie, with its marble floors so shiny you could see your reflection, crystal chandeliers hanging in the main hall, and walls lined with portraits of famous alumni who had gone on to become senators, CEOs, and Nobel Prize winners. She knew every corner of this place better than most students who actually attended here. While her classmates at Roosevelt complained about their 40-minute lunch break, Maya spent hours wandering Westfield's empty corridors after her own school day ended. She had memorized which classroom doors squeaked, which bathrooms had the softest echo, and exactly how long it took to walk from the main entrance to the science wing. But it was the music room that called to her most. Room 237, tucked away in the arts building, became her sanctuary. The afternoon sunlight would stream through tall windows, casting everything in a golden glow that made even the dust particles look magical. Rows of music stands stood like soldiers, and along the walls, locked cabinets held instruments worth more money than her family saw in a year. Maya would press her face against the glass of those cabinets, staring at the violins inside. They were beautiful, some dark wood, others lighter, all of them polished until they gleamed. She had taught herself to recognize the different types by watching YouTube videos on her phone. That one was probably a full-size 4/4 violin. The smaller one next to it looked like a 3/4 size. She wondered what they sounded like, how the wood would feel under her fingers, how the bow would glide across the strings. Her mother had caught her there once, standing transfixed in front of the instrument cabinet. Linda had walked in carrying her cleaning supplies, ready to mop the music room floor, and found Maya with her palm pressed flat against the glass. "Bao Bei," her mother had said softly in Mandarin, using the pet name that meant precious treasure. "We look, we don't touch." Maya had pulled her hand away quickly, leaving a small smudge on the glass that her mother immediately wiped clean. "I was just wondering what they sound like," Maya had whispered. Linda had glanced around the empty room, then moved closer to her daughter. "I hear them sometimes when the students practice. Beautiful sounds like birds singing. But these are not for us, Maya. We have our place here and they have theirs." That conversation happened 3 years ago, but Maya remembered every word. She understood what her mother meant. They existed in the spaces between, not quite belonging to the world of Roosevelt High with its limited resources and low expectations, but certainly not part of Westfield Academy's world of privilege and endless possibilities. The students at Westfield barely noticed her. To them, she was just part of the background, like the paintings on the walls or the marble columns in the hallway. She had heard them talking countless times as she helped her mother empty trash cans or dust shelves. They complained about their private tutors, their piano lessons that cost more per hour than her mother made in a day, their parents' expectations for them to get into Ivy League schools. One afternoon, she had been organizing sheet music in the music room when 3 Westfield students walked in for practice. They didn't see her crouched behind the piano, carefully putting papers in order. "Ugh, I have my violin lesson tomorrow," one girl had groaned, setting down a case that probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe. "I hate it so much. My mom keeps saying I need it for my college applications, but I'm terrible." "At least you don't have to do piano," her friend had replied. "My teacher keeps assigning these impossible pieces. Like, sorry I can't play Chopin perfectly after 3 months of lessons." Maya had stayed perfectly still, listening to them complain about opportunities she could only dream of. When they finally left, she had waited a full 10 minutes before standing up, her legs cramped from crouching so long. That night, she had gone home to their tiny apartment and opened YouTube on her phone. She searched for violin tutorials, starting with the absolute basics. How to hold a violin. Beginner bow technique. Your first scale. She watched video after video until her phone battery died, absorbing every piece of information she could find. The next day, while helping her mother clean out a storage room in the basement, Maya found it. An old violin case, dusty and forgotten, pushed behind boxes of outdated textbooks. Her heart had pounded as she opened it. Inside was a violin that had seen better days. The varnish was scratched, one of the tuning pegs was slightly loose, and it was missing its shoulder rest. But it was real, and it was beautiful. "Mom," she had called, her voice shaking with excitement. Linda had come over, her expression changing from curiosity to concern when she saw what Maya was holding. "Put it back, Baobei. That's not ours, but it's just sitting here. No one's using it. Look, it doesn't even have strings." Maya had pointed to the instrument. "It's basically broken." Her mother had been quiet for a long moment, then had sighed deeply. "If anyone asks, we found it like this, okay? Old and broken, maybe. Maybe we can see if there are strings somewhere else." That had been the beginning of everything. Maya had researched how to restring a violin, how to tune it, how to make a shoulder rest from foam padding. She had turned that forgotten instrument into something playable. And every evening after her mother finished work, they would sneak back into the music room where Maya would practice. Her mother became her lookout, keeping watch while Maya taught herself to play using nothing but YouTube videos and determination. Hour after hour, night after night, Maya learned to make music in the darkness. Her only audience the empty chairs and silent music stands of room 237. She never imagined that one day, those same empty spaces would be filled with people who had underestimated her, and that her secret would change everything. The faculty lounge at Westfield Academy smelled like expensive coffee and frustration. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late March, and the annual spring talent show was only 3 weeks away. Mrs. Rebecca Pemberton sat slumped in her favorite armchair, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, surrounded by crumpled pieces of paper and empty coffee cups. As the head of the music department, Rebecca had been teaching at Westfield for 15 years. She had arrived full of hope and passion, ready to nurture young musical talents. But after years of dealing with entitled students who treated music lessons like just another item to check off their college application lists, her enthusiasm had slowly turned into bitter disappointment. "This is hopeless," she muttered, tossing another audition form into the trash. "Absolutely hopeless." Mr. David Harrison looked up from his stack of essays. He taught advanced English literature and had a reputation for being sharp-tongued and sarcastic. His students either loved him or were terrified of him, but they all respected his intelligence. He had been watching Rebecca's meltdown with growing amusement. "Let me guess," David said, leaning back in his chair. "Little Brittany Peterson thinks she can sing because her parents paid for expensive vocal coaching, but she sounds like a cat in a blender?" Rebecca let out a bitter laugh. "Worse, she wants to perform a song she wrote herself. It's called My Daddy's Credit Card, and she's completely serious about it." She picked up another form. "And here's Timothy Walsh. He wants to play piano, but he can barely manage chopsticks without making mistakes. His parents have been paying for lessons for 8 years. Ms. Jennifer Lopez, the art teacher, joined the conversation from across the room. "Don't even get me started on the visual arts submissions. Half of them want to display paintings that their private tutors obviously helped them with, and the other half thinks splashing paint randomly on a canvas counts as abstract expressionism. It's like they think talent is something you can buy," Rebecca continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "These kids have had every advantage in the world. Private teachers, expensive instruments, all the time they could want to practice. But they have no passion, no real understanding of music. They just go through the motions because their parents tell them to." David nodded knowingly. He had seen the same thing in his literature classes. Students who had read every classic novel but couldn't tell him why they mattered. Who could analyze symbolism because they had been taught the formulas, but had never felt genuinely moved by a piece of writing. "Remember when we actually had talented students?" asked Mr. Robert Chen, the history teacher, walking in with his own cup of coffee. "Kids who practiced because they loved it, not because their parents were paying someone to make them?" Those days are long gone, Rebecca said sadly. Now I have to listen to mediocre performance after mediocre performance, and I have to pretend they're wonderful because their parents donate millions to the school. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of squeaking wheels in the hallway. Through the open door, they could see Maya pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies, her head down as she focused on not bumping into the expensive artwork lining the walls. Her mother was nowhere in sight, probably working in another building. David's eyes lit up with mischief. He had noticed Maya around school for years, always quiet, always in the background. She represented everything these privileged students were not, someone who actually had to work for everything. Someone who understood what it meant to have nothing handed to you. You know, David said slowly, a smirk spreading across his face. Maybe we're looking in the wrong place for talent. Rebecca followed his gaze to Maya in the hallway. What do you mean? Well, you're complaining that all our students are spoiled and have no real understanding of struggle or passion, right? Maybe we should ask someone who actually knows what it's like to work for something. David's voice carried just loud enough for the other teachers to hear, and a few chuckles rippled around the room. Jennifer looked confused. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Why not? David continued, warming to his theme. I bet she's got some hidden talents. People like that always do, don't they? Natural ability that doesn't need expensive lessons to shine through. Rebecca was starting to catch on to David's joke, and despite her better judgment, she found herself curious about where this was going. You really think she can play an instrument? Oh, I'm sure she's got natural rhythm, David said, his sarcasm barely concealed. Probably learned to play on pots and pans at home. Wouldn't that be refreshing? Finally, some authentic talent for our fancy talent show. The other teachers were beginning to laugh now, caught up in David's performance. It felt good to joke about something after weeks of dealing with disappointing auditions and entitled students. None of them stopped to think about how cruel they were being. Come on, Rebecca, David urged. Ask her. What's the worst that could happen? Maybe she'll surprise us all. Rebecca found herself standing up before she had really decided to. The idea was ridiculous but somehow appealing. After days of listening to students who had every advantage but no soul, maybe it would be entertaining to see what someone with no training at all could do. Maya. Rebecca called out, her voice carrying down the hallway. Could you come here for a moment? Maya looked up from her cleaning cart, startled to hear her name. She glanced around to make sure Mrs. Pemberton was actually talking to her, then slowly walked toward the faculty lounge. Her heart started beating faster. In all her years of moving through these halls, teachers rarely spoke directly to her except to ask her to move out of the way or to tell her which areas had already been cleaned. Yes, Mrs. Pemberton? Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. Rebecca stepped into the doorway with David and several other teachers gathering behind her like an audience waiting for a show. Maya, we're working on our spring talent show and we're looking for students with natural ability. Authentic talent, you might say. Maya looked confused. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't go to school here. I go to Roosevelt High. Oh, we know that, David interjected, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. But talent doesn't care about which school you attend, does it? We're looking for raw, unpolished ability. The kind of thing that comes from real-life experience. Maya could sense something was off about this conversation, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The teachers were all staring at her with expressions she couldn't read, and there was an energy in the air that made her uncomfortable. I'm not sure what you mean, she said carefully. Rebecca leaned against the doorframe, trying to appear casual. Well, we were wondering if you have any musical talents. Can you sing? Play an instrument? We're always interested in discovering new talent, especially from unexpected places. The word unexpected hit Maya like a physical blow. She understood now. They weren't asking because they thought she might be talented. They were asking because they thought it would be funny to watch the janitor's daughter try to play music. I don't really play anything, Maya stammered, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Oh, come now, David said, stepping forward with exaggerated encouragement. Don't be modest. I bet you've got some hidden skills. What about violin? That's a beautiful instrument, very expressive. Perfect for someone with natural feeling for music. Behind him, Maya could hear other teachers struggling to contain their laughter. Jennifer was covering her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking slightly. Even Mr. Chen, who she had always thought seemed nice, was grinning. Here, Rebecca said suddenly. disappearing into the music room and returning with a violin case. "Why don't you just try?" "No pressure. We're just curious to see what raw, untrained talent looks like." Maya stared at the violin case in Rebecca's hands. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. These people had no idea what they were asking. They thought they were setting up a joke at her expense, waiting to laugh at the cleaning lady's daughter who had probably never seen a violin up close. What they didn't know was that Maya had been holding the secret for 3 years. Every night alone in room 237, she had practiced until her fingers bled and her shoulders ached. She had memorized pieces that these teachers probably couldn't play themselves. She had turned that broken violin from the storage room into something beautiful, and she had taught herself things that their spoiled students with expensive lessons had never bothered to learn. Standing there in that hallway, surrounded by teachers who saw her as nothing more than entertainment, Maya faced the biggest decision of her young life. She could walk away, go back to being invisible, continue living her secret in the shadows, or she could take that violin case and show them exactly what raw, untrained talent looked like. The silence stretched on as Maya stared at the case, her mind racing. Behind her, she could hear students in the hallway starting to notice the commotion, their curious whispers adding to the pressure of the moment. Finally, Maya reached out and took the violin case from Rebecca's hands. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll try." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she held the violin case. The weight of it felt familiar, even though this wasn't the same battered instrument she had been practicing with for 3 years. Around her, the teachers waited with barely concealed grins, expecting to witness what they thought would be an embarrassing spectacle. Students had begun gathering in the hallway, drawn by the unusual sight of teachers and staff clustered together, watching the janitor's daughter hold an expensive violin case. What none of them knew was that Maya had been preparing for this moment her entire life, even though she had never imagined it would happen like this. It all started on a cold December evening 3 years ago. Maya had been 13 then, still small enough to hide behind the grand piano in room 237 without being noticed. She had been helping her mother clean when a group of advanced students came in for after-school practice. Maya had crouched behind the piano bench, invisible as always, while 3 teenagers unpacked their instruments. The first violin note that filled the room had hit Maya like electricity. She had heard violins before, of course, in movies, on the radio, in elevator music, but hearing one played live just 20 feet away from her was completely different. The sound seemed to come from somewhere deep inside the instrument, rich and warm and alive in a way that made her chest ache with longing. The student playing wasn't even particularly good. Maya learned later that violin was just his backup instrument, something he did for college applications while focusing on tennis. But to Maya, hiding behind that piano, it sounded like magic. That night, she had gone home to their tiny apartment and immediately grabbed her mother's old phone. Her fingers shook as she typed "how to play violin" into YouTube. The first video that came up was titled, "Violin for Complete Beginners, Lesson 1. The instructor was a kind-looking woman with gray hair who spoke slowly and clearly, demonstrating how to hold a violin properly. Maya watched that video 17 times. Over the following weeks, she devoured every violin tutorial she could find. She learned about bow holds and finger positions, about rosin and strings, about the difference between first position and third position. She discovered violinists she had never heard of before. Itzhak Perlman, whose playing made her cry even though she didn't understand why. Hilary Hahn, whose technical precision seemed impossible. Joshua Bell, who could make a violin sound like it was singing. The problem, of course, was that she didn't have a violin to practice on. Maya tried everything. She found a stick in the park and pretended it was a bow, moving her arm in the motions she had seen in the videos. She used a ruler and rubber bands to simulate finger positions. She even tried to make a violin from a shoebox and fishing line, following a craft tutorial she found online. Nothing worked. Then came the day she found the violin in the storage room. It was a miracle disguised as junk. The old instrument was covered in dust, its strings long since snapped, its bridge collapsed. But Maya recognized it immediately from all the videos she had watched. She knew what each part was called, how it was supposed to look, how it could be fixed. Her mother had been hesitant at first. "Baube, we don't take things that aren't ours," Linda had said. But Maya could see the longing in her mother's eyes, too. Linda had grown up poor in rural China. where music was a luxury no one could afford. Maybe she saw this as a chance to give her daughter something she had never had. It's broken anyway, Maya had argued. No one wants it. And look, there's a whole box of old strings here too. They were just going to throw it all away. That night, Maya had spent hours on YouTube learning how to restring a violin. Her fingers were clumsy at first, and she broke 2 strings before she figured out the proper tension. When she finally got all 4 strings on and tuned the instrument using a free app on her phone, the sound that came out was scratchy and imperfect, but it was real. From that moment on, Maya's life divided into 2 parts. The daytime Maya, who was invisible and silent, and the nighttime Maya, who came alive in room 237. Every evening after her mother finished cleaning, they would wait until the building was completely empty. Then Maya would slip back into the music room with her rescued violin. Her mother would keep watch by the door while Maya practiced, warning her if any late-working teachers or security guards came by. Those practice sessions became the most important part of Maya's day. She would set up her phone on a music stand, playing tutorial videos over and over while she tried to copy what she saw. Her fingers developed calluses from pressing the strings. Her left shoulder ached from holding the violin for hours. But gradually, slowly, she began to make real music. The first song she learned properly was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It took her 3 weeks to play it without mistakes. But when she finally managed to get through the entire melody cleanly, she cried. Her mother cried too, standing by the door and listening to her daughter create something beautiful from nothing. From there, Maya became obsessed. She learned scales until her fingers could move up and down the fingerboard without thinking. She practiced bow exercises until her right arm was strong and steady. She worked on pieces that were far too advanced for her level, failing over and over until suddenly, miraculously, she could play them. YouTube became her conservatory. She found channels dedicated to violin technique, violin history, violin repair. She learned to adjust her own bridge when it shifted, to replace her own strings when they broke, to recognize when her violin needed tuning just by the sound. She watched masterclasses given by world-renowned violinists, studying their finger positions and bow techniques with the intensity of a medical student. The hardest part was staying silent about it. At Roosevelt High, Maya had no friends who would understand why she spent all her free time learning an instrument she would never be able to afford lessons for. At home, she and her mother kept their secret, speaking about it only in whispers and only in Mandarin, as if using their native language would somehow protect them from being discovered. Maya learned pieces that the Westfield students with their expensive teachers never bothered to master. She practiced scales that their private instructors assigned but they never really worked on. While they complained about their lessons and looked for shortcuts, Maya spent 4 hours a night perfecting her technique because every moment with the violin felt precious. She had memorized entire concerts by heart, playing along with recordings through her phone's tinny speakers. Bach's Partita No. 2 in D minor, the same piece that had taken Joshua Bell years to master, became her obsession. She worked on it section by section, measure by measure, until she could play it with her eyes closed. The violin became her voice, the way she expressed everything she couldn't say out loud. When she was frustrated with her invisibility at school, she played sharp, angry pieces. When she missed her father, who had died when she was 10, she played slow, sad melodies that made her mother weep in the doorway. When she dreamed about a different life, she played soaring, hopeful pieces that seemed to lift her off the ground. Now, standing in that hallway with teachers and students staring at her, Maya realized that her secret was about to become public. Everything she had worked for in the darkness was about to be exposed, to the harsh light of judgment and expectation. Could feel her phone buzzing in her pocket. Probably her mother, texting to ask where she was. Linda had no idea that Maya was standing here, about to reveal the thing they had protected so carefully for 3 years. Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her. Mrs. Pemberton, who thought she was about to witness an embarrassing disaster. Mr. Harrison, whose smirk suggested he was already planning how he would describe the scene to his wife over dinner. The students, some holding their phones up ready to record whatever was about to happen. None of them had any idea what they were about to hear. Maya opened the violin case. The violin case opened with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo through the entire hallway. Inside, nestled in deep blue velvet, lay a beautiful instrument that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Maya stared at it for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. This violin was nothing like the scratched, battered instrument she had been practicing with for 3 years. This one was perfect, polished wood that seemed to glow, strings that caught the light like silver threads, and a bow with horsehair so pristine it looked like it had never been used. Around her, the crowd had grown larger. Students were abandoning their lockers and after-school activities to see what was happening. Some had their phones out already, sensing that something interesting was about to unfold. The teachers stood in their cluster, still wearing those expectant smirks, waiting for the show to begin. Maya's hand shook slightly as she lifted the violin from its case. It was heavier than her practice instrument, but the weight felt good in her hands, substantial and real. She could smell the wood polish and the faint scent of rosin. Everything about this violin screamed quality and expense, the kind of instrument that most students at Westfield probably took for granted. "Well?" Mrs. Pemberton prompted, her voice carrying a note of impatience. "We don't have all day." Maya looked up at the sea of faces surrounding her. She could see some students whispering to each other, probably wondering why the janitor's daughter was holding a violin worth more than most people's cars. A few looked genuinely curious, but most seemed to be waiting for entertainment at her expense. For a split second, Maya considered putting the violin back in its case and walking away. She could go back to being invisible, go back to her secret practice sessions in room 237, go back to a life where no one expected anything from her because no one knew what she was capable of. But then she thought about her mother, probably wondering where she was right now. She thought about all those nights when Linda had stood guard by the door, risking her job so that Maya could practice. She thought about the hours she had spent teaching herself, the calluses on her fingers, the ache in her shoulder from holding her violin for so long. She thought about every YouTube video she had watched, every piece she had memorized, every moment of joy and frustration and determination that had brought her to this point. Maya closed her eyes for a moment and made her choice. When she opened them again, something had changed in her posture. The nervous, hesitant girl was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Maya lifted the violin to her left shoulder with practiced ease, adjusting it until it sat perfectly against her collarbone. Her left hand found its position on the neck of the instrument, fingers curved exactly as she had learned from countless tutorial videos. Mrs. Pemberton's smirk faltered slightly. This wasn't how she had expected Maya to hold the violin. Most beginners fumbled with it, held it awkwardly, struggled just to balance it properly. But Maya looked natural. Maya picked up the bow and tested the tension, making a small adjustment that showed she knew what she was doing. She raised the bow to the strings and played a few quick, soft notes. Not a melody, just testing the sound, checking the tuning. Even those few random notes rang clear and true, with a tone that made several people in the crowd blink in surprise. "What piece are you going to play?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice not quite as confident as it had been a few minutes earlier. Maya looked at him directly for the first time. "Canon in D," she said quietly, "by Pachelbel." A few of the students in the crowd exchanged glances. They knew that piece, and it was beautiful but technically demanding, definitely not something a beginner would attempt. Mrs. Pemberton frowned. Canon in D required skill in multiple positions on the fingerboard, smooth bowing technique, and excellent intonation. If Maya was planning to attempt it, she was setting herself up for spectacular failure. Maya positioned her bow at the tip, just above the strings. She took a deep breath, thinking of all the times she had played this piece in the empty music room, with only the dust motes and silence as her audience. She had chosen Canon in D not to show off, but because it was the piece that had made her fall in love with the violin in the first place. The first time she had heard it played properly, she had cried. It was a piece about hope and beauty and the way music could transform ordinary moments into something magical. She began to play. The first note that emerged from the violin was perfect, clear, sweet and strong. It hung in the air for a moment before Maya followed it with the second note, then the third. The famous opening melody of Canon in D began to unfold, each note precise and beautiful. The change in the hallway was immediate and dramatic. The whispering stopped. The shuffling of feet stopped. Even the sound of phones buzzing seemed to fade away. Everyone stood perfectly still, transfixed by what they were hearing. Maya's fingers moved across the strings with the confidence of someone who had played this piece hundreds of times. Her vibrato was controlled and expressive, adding warmth to each note without being excessive. Her bowing was smooth and even, creating a tone that resonated through the marble hallway like liquid gold. Mrs. Pemberton's mouth fell open. In 15 years of teaching, she had rarely heard students play with this level of skill and musicality. The technique was flawless, but more than that, Maya was making music. Real, emotional, transcendent music that made everyone who heard it stop whatever they were doing and listen. Mr. Harrison's smirk had completely disappeared. He stood frozen watching this girl he had dismissed as a joke transform into something extraordinary right before his eyes. The cleaning cart stood abandoned behind her, but Maya looked nothing like a janitor's daughter now. She looked like a concert violinist. As Maya moved into the more complex sections of the piece, her confidence grew. Her left hand shifted smoothly up and down the fingerboard, finding each position with the accuracy of someone who had spent years perfecting her technique. The higher notes rang out with crystal clarity, while the lower notes resonated with rich warmth. Students began gathering from other parts of the building, drawn by the sound. A few teachers peeked out of their classrooms, wondering where the beautiful music was coming from. The hallway that had been mostly empty 10 minutes ago was now packed with people, all of them staring at Maya in amazement. Maya was lost in the music now, her eyes closed, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. This was what she had dreamed of for 3 years, the chance to share her music with other people, to let them hear what she could do. All the secret practice sessions, all the YouTube videos, all the hours of painstaking work had led to this moment. The melody soared and dipped, taking everyone on an emotional journey. Some students had tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty of what they were hearing. Others stood with their phones raised, recording, but they had forgotten to actually start the video because they were too mesmerized to remember. When Maya reached the climactic section of the piece, her playing became even more passionate. The notes seemed to dance off the strings, filling the hallway with sound that was somehow both powerful and delicate at the same time. Her bow moved with perfect control, creating dynamics that ranged from the softest whisper to triumphant declarations. Mrs. Pemberton felt tears forming in her eyes. This was why she had become a music teacher, to witness moments like this when music transcended everything else and touched something deep in the human soul. She had been searching for this kind of authentic talent for years, and it had been right here all along, hidden in plain sight. As Maya approached the end of the piece, the hallway had become completely silent except for the sound of her violin. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped humming. Every person present was holding their breath, not wanting to disturb the magic that was happening. The final notes of canon in D rang out clear and true, sustained with perfect control until Maya slowly lowered her bow. The last note faded gradually, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The hallway full of people stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Then someone began to clap. It started slowly, hesitantly, but within seconds the entire hallway erupted in applause. Students whooped and cheered. Teachers clapped with tears in their eyes. The sound bounced off the marble walls and high ceilings, creating a symphony of appreciation that seemed to go on forever. Maya opened her eyes and looked around at the sea of amazed faces. These were the same people who had ignored her for years, who had looked right through her as if she didn't exist. Now they were staring at her with wonder and respect, applauding her as if she had just performed at Carnegie Hall. She carefully lowered the violin, her hands still steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had done it. She had shared her secret with the world, and instead of laughing at her, they were celebrating her. But this was only the beginning. The applause seemed to last forever, but eventually it began to fade, leaving Maya standing in the hallway still holding the violin, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had done it. She had actually done it. After 3 years of hiding her talent, of playing only for empty rooms and dust motes, she had finally shared her music with the world. As the crowd began to disperse, Maya noticed that several students were staring at their phones with expressions of excitement. She didn't realize it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. A girl named Ashley from her grade level at Roosevelt High pushed through the crowd, her eyes wide with amazement. Maya, I had no idea you could play like that. That was incredible. Ashley had been recording the entire performance on her phone, and without thinking much about it, she immediately posted it to her social media accounts with the caption, "You won't believe what just happened at Westfield Academy. The janitor's daughter just blew everyone's mind with her violin skills." Within minutes, the video was being shared and reshared. Ashley's friends shared it with their friends, who shared it with their friends. Students from both Roosevelt High and Westfield Academy began posting it on their accounts. The story was too good not to share. The underdog moment, the beautiful music, the shocked faces of the teachers who had clearly underestimated Maya. Meanwhile, Maya was carefully placing the violin back in its case, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Mrs. Pemberton approached her slowly, her face pale and her eyes filled with something that looked like shame. "Maya," Mrs. Pemberton said softly, her voice completely different from the mocking tone she had used earlier. I owe you an apology, a huge apology. What we did today was wrong, and I am deeply ashamed of my behavior." Maya looked up at her music teacher, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to be angry, to tell Mrs. Pemberton exactly how it felt to be treated like a joke. But mostly she just felt tired. The performance had drained her emotionally, and she wasn't sure she had the energy for confrontation. "We thought," Mrs. Pemberton continued, struggling to find the right words, "we thought we were being clever, but we were just being cruel. You have extraordinary talent, Maya. I've been teaching for 15 years and I've never heard a student play with such skill and emotion. Where did you learn?" "YouTube," Maya said quietly, snapping the violin case closed. "I taught myself." Mrs. Pemberton's eyes widened. "You taught yourself? All of it?" Maya nodded. "For 3 years. I found an old violin in storage and fixed it up. I practice here at night after my mom finishes cleaning." The admission hit Mrs. Pemberton like a physical blow. While she had been complaining about students who had every advantage but no passion, Maya had been teaching herself in secret, driven by pure love for music. The contrast was stark and humbling. Mr. Harrison had been standing nearby, listening to the conversation. He stepped forward, his usual arrogance completely gone. "Maya, I want to apologize too. What I did today was unforgivable. I was frustrated with my students and I took it out on you. That's not who I want to be as a teacher or as a person." Other teachers began approaching, each offering their own apologies. Maya accepted them politely, but she could see they were struggling with their own guilt. They had spent years looking right through her, treating her as invisible, and now they had to face the fact that they had been sharing their space with someone remarkable all along. By the time Maya got home to the small apartment above the maintenance building, her phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Her mother was waiting for her, having heard from other staff members that something unusual had happened. "Bao Bei," Linda said in Mandarin, studying her daughter's face. "Mrs. Patterson from the front office says you played violin today." "In front of everyone." Maya nodded, suddenly feeling exhausted. She sank onto their small couch and told her mother everything: the teacher's cruel joke, her decision to reveal their secret, the performance, the reactions. Linda listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through worry, anger, and finally pride. "I'm sorry, Mama," Maya said finally. "I know we were supposed to keep it secret, but I couldn't let them think I was nothing." Linda sat beside her daughter and pulled her into a tight hug. "You have nothing to apologize for, my brave girl. I'm so proud of you I could burst." They spent the evening looking at Maya's phone together, watching the numbers climb as the video spread across social media platforms. By midnight, it had been viewed over 50,000 times. By morning, that number had reached 500,000. The video had been picked up by local news stations, then regional ones, then national ones. The story was irresistible. A working-class girl teaching herself violin in secret, then stunning everyone with her hidden talent. Comments poured in from around the world, praising Maya's skill and condemning the teacher's behavior. When Maya arrived at Roosevelt High the next morning, she was greeted by a crowd of reporters and cameras. Her principal, Mr. Rodriguez, had to escort her through the back entrance to avoid the chaos. Students she had never spoken to before stopped her in the hallways to congratulate her. Teachers who had barely noticed her existence suddenly wanted to talk to her about her future plans. But the real changes started with a phone call that afternoon. Mrs. Pemberton called. Maya's phone personally, her voice shaking with emotion. "Maya, I need you to come to Westfield Academy as soon as possible. There are some people here who want to meet you." When Maya and her mother arrived at the school, they were led to the principal's office, where they found not only Mrs. Pemberton and the principal, but also 2 members of the school's board of trustees. The board members, who had seen the video and read the news coverage, were deeply embarrassed by their staff's behavior and concerned about the school's reputation. "Maya," said Dr. Williams, the head of the board, "we want to offer you a full scholarship to attend Westfield Academy, including access to our advanced music program. We also want to provide you with private violin lessons with the best teachers in the city." Maya stared at him in disbelief. "But I'm already a junior. I only have 2 years left of high school." "That's 2 years where you could have access to resources that will prepare you for any conservatory in the country," Dr. Williams replied. "Our music program has connections with Juilliard, Curtis, Berkeley, all the top schools. You deserve every opportunity to develop your remarkable talent." Her mother squeezed Maya's hand, tears streaming down her face. Linda had spent 12 years cleaning these hallways, watching privileged children take their opportunities for granted. Now her daughter was being offered those same opportunities, and it felt like a miracle. But the scholarship was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, offers poured in from across the country. The principal violinist from the City Symphony Orchestra reached out, offering to take Maya as a private student. A famous violin teacher from a prestigious conservatory called, wanting to work with her via video lessons. Recording companies expressed interest in her story. The local news did a follow-up story 3 months later, showing Maya practicing in a real music studio instead of an empty classroom. She had grown more confident, more polished, but she hadn't lost the emotional depth that had made her original performance so powerful. "The hardest part," Maya told the reporter, "is remembering where I came from while moving toward where I want to go. I never want to forget what it felt like to be invisible, because there are probably other invisible people out there who have their own secrets, their own talents that nobody knows about." Mrs. Pemberton, who had become Maya's biggest supporter and advocate, appeared in the same news segment. "Maya taught all of us a lesson about making assumptions," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She showed us that talent doesn't care about your background or your bank account. It only cares about your passion and your willingness to work hard." The teachers who had participated in the original cruel joke had all used the incident as an opportunity for self-reflection. Mr. Harrison started a program at the school for recognizing and supporting overlooked students. Several of them wrote public apologies that were published in the local newspaper, acknowledging their prejudice and promising to do better. A year later, Maya performed at her first professional concert with the Youth Symphony Orchestra. Her mother sat in the front row, wearing the nicest dress she had ever owned, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter play for an audience of hundreds. Maya had chosen to perform Canon in D, the same piece that had changed her life in a school hallway. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the smallest one. Every evening after practice, Maya still returned to room 237 at Westfield Academy. But now, instead of practicing alone in secret, she led a volunteer program teaching violin to students who couldn't afford lessons. She had convinced the school to donate some of their older instruments to kids from backgrounds similar to her own. "Everyone deserves a chance to make music," she would tell her students, many of whom were the children of custodians, cafeteria workers, and maintenance staff from various schools around the city. "You never know what beautiful things are hiding inside you until you give them a chance to come out." Maya's story became a reminder that talent can bloom